fires. You know, we're thousands of miles away. What we can be doing is trying to put out, or at least damp down, the big fire that's causing all these other effects. And that's global warming, and that can only be done with federal action soon. That's what we're pushing for on November 3rd.
I want to go to New Orleans for a minute. You mentioned Hurricane Katrina. They are experiencing massive rainstorm, at least 8 inches yesterday. The forecast, it will continue. Mayor Ray Nagin closed City Hall. They closed the schools. They told people not to drive in the streets. The waves, they were afraid, would inundate the buildings that have just been cleaned up from Hurricane Katrina. That connection?
Look, when you raise the warm air holds more water vapor than cold air does, right? That means that in arid areas you get more evaporation and hence more drought, and we're seeing that around the world. Once that water is up there in the atmosphere, it's got to come down someplace. In wet areas or in big storms, we see way more precipitation. The number of storms that drop more than 2 inches of rain in a 24-hour period has grown by something like 25%, the real gully washers. To call it global warming is correct, but almost a misnomer. What we're really doing is adding immense amounts of energy to a system, and that energy is expressing itself in all kinds of ways. More evaporation, more precipitation, higher wind speeds, rapid melt of ice across the Arctic and across every glacial system that we know about, on and on and on. It is, you know, we used to think that we were still a decade or two away from the real emergency. That's what we would have said 20 years ago when I wrote The End of Nature. Now we understand, the modeling makes clear that the planet was more finely balanced than we've understood. What we've done so far has been enough to throw every physical system on Earth out of kilter. What we're fighting for now is not to prevent global warming. There's going to be some global warming. There already is. What we're fighting for now is to keep that miserable and difficult century of global warming from turning into an absolute catastrophe that rewrites the geology and biology of this planet for eons to come.
Bill McKibben, in the Southeast, several states are in the midst of a major drought. As of last week, 71 of North Carolina's 100 counties were in exceptional drought, the federal government's highest classification. Georgia has declared a state of emergency, appealed for federal aid. The drought has also affected large swathes of Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina.
When you increase the temperature, what you're really doing, I mean, if I say the temperature's gone up 1 degree, it doesn't sound like much, but that masks enormous increases in the extremes, much longer and stronger heat waves. You know, we keep having one record warm year after another across this globe, and that doesn't happen without consequences. The Earth is a physical system, and those inputs start to change the outputs pretty darn dramatically.
The action that you're planning as one of the lead forces behind Step It Up on November 3rd. Can you talk about what your demands are? You say the federal government has to take action.
Absolutely. We're talking about 3 things at stepitup07.org. One of them is the same call for an 80% reduction in carbon emissions by 2050 that we called for last spring when we organized 1,400 demonstrations in all 50 states. Those demonstrations were very successful in getting that demand deep into the agenda. It went from being a kind of radical and fringe idea to being very much part of the legislative mix that's reflected in what Congress is thinking about now. Second demand is that we need an immediate moratorium on new coal-fired power. No such thing, at least at the moment, as clean coal. It's dirty where it comes from, and it's dirty when we burn it. And that, you know, if we build any significant percentage of the 150 coal-fired power plants now on the books, then the discussion about dealing with global warming is moot. We will put so much carbon in the atmosphere that we can't control it. Third thing, we need to make sure that the big economic transition that's coming with global warming, with fighting global warming. The move to a new set of energy sources doesn't leave behind the same people that our last economy left behind. So we're stressing very hard this green jobs for all campaign. What we're trying to do this time is find out which of our politicians are actually going to become leaders. People who go to the stepitup07.org website can use the nifty new invite tool devised by my colleagues, all of whom are 22 and 23 and who actually know how the internet really works. And with this neat tool, they can easily invite their senators, congressmen, and the presidential candidates to come appear at one of these hundreds of rallies that will be taking place across the country on November 3rd. They can find out where in their community people will be gathering to make their voices heard. We need a movement as strong, as willing to sacrifice, as morally urgent, as passionate as the civil rights movement was a generation ago. If we don't get it soon, and we have a real time limit here, if we don't get it soon, then we're not going to be able to force the changes that we need over the power of the very strong vested interest that would like to keep things the way they are, even though it's now destabilizing the planet in the most powerful and most tragic ways. Those pictures of that smoke pouring out of those canyons in California should remind us at the deepest level what's at stake and what we can do to help right now.
Bill McKibben, you mentioned Congress. What about the presidential candidates, the Democratic presidential candidates? What about the Democrat-led Congress, both the House and the Senate? What are they doing to deal with this crisis?
They're getting closer. They've started. We haven't done anything about climate change for the 20 years that we've known about it. I mean, literally zip, zilch, nothing in Washington. Finally, this year, there's legislation on the table. There's very good legislation from Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Henry Waxman. That bill is being watered down at the moment by Senator Lieberman of Connecticut and Senator Warner of Virginia. It's a big fight as to what kind of bill will go through. It may not matter unbelievably at the moment because President Bush is going to veto whatever happens. We do need, however, to get the framework for strong legislation, and then we need to make sure that whoever wins the presidency really steps up to this challenge.
What about before? This is the chance that constituencies have all over the country to make demands of candidates, and then afterwards, I don't want to say hold their feet to the fire, given what's happening right now.
I think that would be, in fact, an appropriate and correct thing to say right now. That's what we're trying very hard to do. Look, the presidential candidates, the Democrats, have so far mostly said the right things. After our demonstrations on April 14th, all the leading candidates signed on to this Sanders bill for an 80% reduction. However, none of them have yet shown that they're determined to make the central organizing principle of their presidency, which it pretty much has got to be. This is the biggest thing human beings have ever done, and if we don't get on it right away, none of the other issues will matter. We'll find out on November 3rd which of these people show up to talk to America about this question, and we'll find out what they say, whether or not they're going to go beyond saying the right thing and starting to work and offering solemn assurance.
Bill McKibben, we have to leave it there. I want to thank you for being with us. November 3rd declared a day against global warming. They're stepping it up, and that does it for our show. Our website, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.